Hey y'all, it's me. So Thanksgiving break is over, so we're jumping back in. Today we're gonna start segment three, which is entitled "Converging Roads." Um, we're gonna start uh, with section seven, and it's entitled "Hugo versus Chiyoko." So let's go ahead and get started. Hugo dodged the first attack. Chiyoko wielded her metal weapon like a sword, but he could tell it wasn't a sword. I'm sorry, Hugo, Chiyoko said, but if you had anything to do with the death of my uncle, I have to fight you. I didn't, Hugo said. You can believe me. I can't. Hugo sidestepped to Chiyoko's right as she leapt at him again with a downward strike. Junyo has in his possession stolen family craftsmanship, Chiyoko said. Can either of you explain to me why? Hugo could explain why, but he believed the explanation would make the situation worse. He also wanted to leave the situation to Junyo because it mostly involved him, and Junyo wanted the three of them to fight. It's out of my hands. Doesn't matter, Chiyoko said. If you said anything, you would be asking me to believe you over my own family. I won't ask you to do that, Hugo said. No way he could convince her that her family was lying to her. If Jackson, Akura, and Mateo had set this event in motion, did they have anything to do with the death of her uncle? No, of course not. Akura wouldn't have sent Junyo to Yavera if they had been the ones to kill him. Noboru was Akura and Junyo's dad. His death wasn't recent and didn't involve any of them. If Junyo and Akura were related to these people, why had Jackson and the others decided to pit them against Akura and Junyo's relatives? Why did Chiyoko, Atsuko, and Tsuyoshi's parents lie to them? If anything didn't make sense, it was that. Their parents were to their left, watching everything transpire, and they allowed it. Akura must have met them and pulled them into this. But the question was how? So many questions were running through his head, and he couldn't even stop to think about them clearly because Chiyoko wouldn't stop coming at him with her weapon. These manipulations had no reasoning, no justification he could figure out. He wished he could understand their siblings and the motives behind their actions. Even if you don't believe me, Hugo said, I'm not a liar. This is a complicated situation. To prove my point, I won't fight you. I'll let you take me into custody. He saw the expression on her face change from anger to surprise. Sorry to hear that, Chiyoko said. I adored my uncle. I'm not taking you into custody. Hugo's eyes grew large. She surprised him. He watched her open the metal weapon into a fan. She swiped it through the air at him and slammed him back into the ground with a wave of water. He stood, drenched, and watched her close her fan. He breathed. A second later, she surrounded him in a water column. The water came from above and below at the same time. She used it to hold him in place. He stared out at her, his eyes burning because of the column. He pulled earth from his left, shaped it into a claw, and used it to shove himself from the column. He pulled earth from her right, shaped it into a claw, and used it to grab hold of her at the same time. Out of the column, he rubbed his eyes to see clearly. In the grasp of his earth claw, Chiyoko used a second water column to turn the claw holding her into mud and wash it away. She stepped from the column, dry. You're good, Hugo said, standing up. He wished he was skilled enough in his genetic pyro. He wished he was a skilled enough genetic pyroenergist to dry himself, along with his clothes, off, but that required more training and practice with his pyro energy, which he hadn't gotten to do lately. She was a hydro energist, but was she a kinetic or a genetic? He had known she was to Had he known she was to be an opponent today, he would have asked her about her energy last night when they enjoyed each other's company at Hideki's club. He distributed heat within his body to dry off, but his clothes didn't get to receive the same treatment. Chiyoko made the perfect opponent. She clearly had the advantage. With her control of water, she could change his earth to mud and extinguish his fire. He wouldn't hurt her, but he had to protect himself. Those water columns were dangerous, and she was serious about this fight. More so, she was serious about exacting revenge for her family. Using his geo energy, he had a chance to hold off her attacks, but his pyro energy didn't seem like it would be much help. His pyro energy reminded him of Everguard. Jackson attacked Everguard, so he would have to use his pyro energy. Mateo requested he work on his pyro energy. Did Jackson share that request? Was Jackson really the one that wanted him to develop that ability further? If so, why? He had to incapacitate Chiyoko without hurting her, using one or both his abilities. He quickly came up with a plan. Use his geo energy to trap her. Jackson had fought hydro energists in the past with his pyro energy, but Hugo's pyro energy wasn't on that level yet. If it was, he could evaporate her water. Because it wasn't, he would avoid using it. You really are just going to stand there and not fight me, Chiyoko said. Hugo nodded. That kind of pisses me off, she said. I figured it would, Hugo said and smiled. It would have pissed off Shulan, too. As Chiyoko came at him, he decided the first thing to do was to disarm her. She came at him with her folded metal fan, and he dodged each strike that came his way. Cognizant she would open her fan again soon, when she came at him with a frontal strike, he turned into her outside, grabbed her wrist, and used her momentum to flip her onto her back. He took her weapon. The moment she hit the ground, she sent him into the air with streams of water from her hands. He got his answer, genetic hydro energist. He bound her wrists and restrained them to the ground with his geo energy, but she pulled water from the air around him and encased him in a spear of it. He practiced hand-to-hand combat for the strategy Chiyoko used with her weapon a moment ago, even though he rarely used it. Use your combat skills to lure your opponent into a false sense of security, and then unleash your soul energy at the opportune moment. Because he had such a great view from the sky, he took the time to check on Junyo. From the looks of the battle between him and an Atsuko, soul energy was at the forefront. Using her hydro energy, Chiyoko easily pulled herself from her restraints while Hugo tried to free himself from the spear. He tried to raise Earth to his aid again, but Chiyoko prevented this action, cutting down his Earth with her water. He couldn't even get away with trying to control the mud. He wasn't about to let her drown him. That was one of the worst ways to go. He pulled the earth from up under her and dropped her on her backside. He used the earth to bind her legs, arms, and neck before pulling her into the ground and burying her. Despite doing this, the spear didn't let up, and she made it so he couldn't move in it. When he brought Earth up to the spear to shove himself out of it, the spear protected itself. The Earth could only smash against it and crumble back to the ground. Chiyoko must have made the rim of the spear dense, so he couldn't break free again. He kept himself calm, even though it became difficult to continue holding his breath. He thought. He had to think. If he tried to use his fire to get himself out of this situation, he could end up boiling himself. He continued to smash earth against the spear, but that tactic wasn't working. Chiyoko emerged from a mud pit. He ran plans through his head. The only way to escape was with his fire. He had to do it in a way that it would get him out in one shot, or she'd adapt and find a new way to stop his efforts. The small voice in the back of his head kept telling him that his pyro energy didn't work that way. Along with that small voice, he heard Jackson's voice telling him he had to get himself out of this. It was like they were having one of their old school training sessions all over again. When he noticed Chiyoko pick up her metal fan, the one he dropped after hit with her streams, he latched onto her legs with his earth and pulled her back in the ground to occupy her. If he beat her over the head with a rock, he could get out of this, but that wasn't an option. He planned to honor his word to convince her he was telling the truth. He had to get out of this mess. He had to live. He tried to work out some kind of escape in his head. What could he do with his fire? Earth, fire, earth, fire. How could he get himself out of this water spear in one shot? He lost his breath. He had a plan. With his geo energy, he lifted and rushed Chiyoko at and through the spear. He grabbed hold of her, and they emerged through the other side of the spear together. As soon as he hit the sky, he let go of her and took a deep breath. He fell. He coughed. He breathed. When he regained himself, he allowed himself to land on an earthen platform he pulled and formed from the ground. He coughed a few more times. He watched Chiyoko land on a platform she formed from water she pulled from the sky. "Ugh, you're trying to kill me," Hugo said as the water dripped off of him. "Are you ready to admit your guilt? Not that it would help." "I can't say anything, but I have to live, so..." "Have to live?" Hugo rubbed his hands together before throwing 2 flames at Chiyoko and separating his platform into 6 pieces. As the flames and pieces soared through the air, Hugo took a deep breath as another water column surrounded him. He figured she would attempt the same tactic because she was having so much success with it. "I thought you weren't going to fight back," Chiyoko shouted. "Liar!" "I won't have to fight you to defeat you, my dear," he said to himself. "I don't lie." He caused and directed multiple spires of earth to rise from the ground toward her. She used her folded metal fan and water to cut through the spires. He pulled the 2 flames together and formed a large shuriken. She had shown him some the night before in the bazaar, and he took quite a liking to them. He had studied them during his Lunastran history class and always found them interesting. Now he had an idea how he could use them to his advantage. He distracted her with the spires and concentrated on his fire-forged shuriken at the same time. He had to make it hot enough. He had to concentrate, focus on his trigger, and beyond it. Chiyoko caught the shuriken from the corner of her eye and tried to extinguish it with streams of water. He maneuvered it out of her way. She tried to make her way to it, but the spires preoccupied her. He used them as obstacles to block her from it and him. He lost his breath again. He held his shuriken in the air, made the fire burn hotter, and made his shuriken larger but thinner. When he watched it become red hot through his burning eyes, seeming not to even be flames, he sent it at the spear. Chiyoko whipped through his spires with water streams and ran toward the spear and him. She held her right hand and unleashed a water stream directly at his shuriken. His shuriken hit the water column and evaporated the area that contained him. Chiyoko kicked him before he could drop, but Hugo landed on one of his 6 platform pieces. A bit exhausted from his pyro energy efforts, he brought some of the other pieces near him. After she kicked him, he grabbed her with one of the pieces. Junyo and Guinness. He decided to check on his companions. He thought they might need his help. He saw Junyo falling through the sky while Atsuko watched and waited for him to hit the ground. A giant snake wrapped itself around Guinness. As Hugo was about to help, Guinness slammed his hands on the snake with a smug expression on his face and froze it solid in an instant. Before he could turn back to Junyo, Chiyoko had broken free, came from behind, and kicked him off his platform. But he caught himself with a 3rd piece. He took her off guard, rising back to her level. This time he leapt at her. She tried to strike him with her folded metal fan, but he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back, making her drop her fan. He grabbed her other arm and held it behind her, holding her close. He bound her legs with the fourth piece of the platform by bringing it from the rear. He leaned forward and let them fall through the air. "You're not bad yourself," Chiyoko said through gritted teeth, expressing with hers how torn she was with being angry and impressed. "You better close your eyes," Hugo said, as the fifth piece wrapped around her eyes and head. He bound her arms together behind her back with the sixth piece of his platform. He brought forth the platform from which they fell, split it in half, and engulfed her body with half of it. He expanded the other half, landed on it, and placed her earthen containment unit on it before he took them to the ground. He stepped off the platform. An older woman walked toward them, chuckling. Water fell on top of Chiyoko's earth trap. The earth became mud. However, she couldn't pull herself from all the pieces because they hadn't all been drenched in water. He hardened it again before Chiyoko had a chance to try to climb out, leaving only a small hole in the unit so she could breathe. "You do have a fire in you," the old woman said, with an emphasis on fire. She chortled. "This means I've lost the bet with my brother. No need to be alarmed. I'm Chiyoko's mother." She smiled, which caused him to smile. "You can let her go. I'll have a word with her." She hadn't alarmed him. He almost expected her to be there when he ended this exchange with Chiyoko. He allowed Chiyoko to break from her restraints. She emerged, catching her breath, with a fierce gaze on him. "You tried to kill me," she said. "No," Hugo said. "I kept you from killing me." He couldn't believe he managed to make his fire hot enough to evaporate water. Without the right trigger, he didn't believe he could use his fire in an offensive capacity. But he had a second trigger, the desire to live for others, for himself, and for the answers he was after. He couldn't die yet. When he helped others, he never minded putting his life in danger or his future. He didn't know if he had one. He realized he wanted to live and find out what his future would entail. He graduated from Guitar University and immediately searched for his dad and brother. He traveled the path he thought was his. In truth, he wandered that path in darkness, lost because he didn't know what else to do. He didn't know what he'd do if he wasn't searching for them. He didn't know what he'd do if he ever managed to find them. He had a goal now. He was going to focus on it. Along the way, he could plan for his future, even while he continued to focus on his present. He took deep breaths and breathed them upward toward the sky. He leaned on his knees for a quick moment. He felt exhausted from the use of his pyro energy. He had to ignore that feeling when Chiyoko came at him with her fan she retrieved while he had been occupied with his thoughts. "Calm down, girl," Chiyo said. "You don't want to hurt him anyway. I noticed how disheartened you were when I told you you'd have to fight him." Chiyoko's eyes grew large in surprise. "Atsuko told me where you spent the night last night. Anyway, this is over." She winked at Hugo and elbowed him. "That fire shuriken was an artistic piece of work." "Nothing happened," Chiyoko said quickly. "I know," Chiyo said. "Hugo's a gentleman." "What is this all about, Mom?" Chiyoko asked. "Do you know him?" Her expression was one of confusion. "He's part of the reason Uncle Noboru is gone, isn't he?" Hugo watched the child question her mom and settled his gaze on the mom after posed with that final question. He and Chiyoko awaited her answers. A broad grin spread across Chiyoko's face, revealing all her pearly whites. She turned around and walked away. If you want answers, follow me. Alright, guys, that was Hugo versus Chiyoko. Tomorrow is Junyo versus Atsuko. Hope you enjoyed that. Pardon my rusty voice acting. It's been a couple of days, but hopefully I'll get back on track, and I hope you enjoyed that. Adios.